Here, Alec Harrison. We have a Brianless episode, but fear not, we've decided to bring on our, I think, rivals, professional rivals, just fun little game. Kevin
It's a
Griffin and
game.
Clark Sell.
It's a game you made up.
I think I made it up, to be quite honest with you, just because I wanted to troll you some.
So,
All
if
in
you
good
don't
fun.
know, Kevin and Clark have both been on our podcast a few times. So, if you're not super familiar with them, both great guys. We just started making jokes with Clark. Clark's latest thing. I'm gonna blank on the name, Clark, but you do offer some coaching now. So I've actually partaken in that. So if you want to learn more, either reach out to Clark or myself.
From code to clarity.com. Come on,
Yeah,
it's not that hard.
it'll be in the podcast notes as well for anybody listening to this audio wise. But yeah, reach out to me if you want to learn any more about that. But as a part of that, I get a chat with Clark. We go about every other week, and one of the jabs we make is the first time we had Clark on, we actually did a really long recording, and then we immediately had Kevin back on to regain the throne of the longest podcast guest. So we just give Clark a hard time, and Tessa's podcast was also one that I'll plug, and it was really funny because I think Clark went on, and then immediately after Kevin went on. So it's a competition that Kevin's winning as of right now. That I don't know
Yeah.
if he meant to or is trying, but so if you're unfamiliar
Sad
with,
days.
if you're unfamiliar with them, I'd say definitely go check out our previous podcast episodes. Check out Tessa's podcast, and yeah, just let us know. But one thing I thought was really interesting is you both are kind of a little bit further along in your career than I would say I am as of right now.
He's calling us
And
old.
It's
Uh,
ageist.
Yeah.
seasons.
I'm
I
out.
think in Tessa's podcast, I called Clark Grandpa Clark. But
I think I
one thing,
called me Grandpa first.
one thing I'm curious about is how have you guys like? Is that being a nice guy is kind of a persona you both have? Like Clark, you've been really big, and Kevin, both really big in the user group scene. I think everybody's like, oh yeah, just go talk to them. Like they're pretty nice guys. Like I feel like the stereotypical technologist is the guy in the basement who like sits in the dark, and if you message him, he's just like pissed off that he has to even talk to you. Like, is that something that you guys have intentionally done with like your personal brands, or like how have you guys worked to be like the nice guys in technology and not like the crotchety guy who gets the job done, but like everybody says is unpleasant to even talk to?
You want to go first, Clark?
Yeah, it's funny. I haven't really thought about a personal brand until recently. I just sort of did my thing, and I always felt like being good is there's nothing wrong with being good, so be good. I'm sort of in the place of like give and you will then receive. And I haven't really ever asked. Like, I think the first thing I asked was for some testimonials from for the website, and that was like a really heavy ask for me. I haven't even asked everybody that I want to ask, but just even that ask was a hard one. The irony is, I had somebody tell me early on in my career that I should never work on a personal brand, which I think was some very, very bad advice. And it was something that tried to lift them up versus kind of lift the whole ecosystem around them. But I don't know. I think I just try to be authentically me. I think, in fact, Alec, it might have been you who said you're just, was it radical candor? I don't know. I just, do the right thing and be what you want others to be. And if you want to be a crotchety, toxic fucker, then that's kind of what you're going to get. And we have enough of that in tech. So I don't aspire for those people to be in my tribe anyways. So, I mean, sure, I've done some bitching, but I figure put more good into the world than you want and be the example you want to see.
I'll build on some of that. For me, we've been on the circuit long enough that we have all been in that room. We've been in that conversation with that type of toxic personality where when they start talking, you go, I am done with this conversation.
Yeah,
I don't
I'm
want to
out.
be around this person. And I think kind of selfishly, I don't want to be that person. Like I don't want to be in a conversation with someone who's just actively thinking, I don't want to talk to Kevin anymore. Um, I want to be approachable. I want to be able to help people because I have I've always held the belief, religious karma, whatever you want to call it, the more good you put out into the world, the more you'll receive back. And I like to think that I've received plenty back from the universe of what I've put out there. Um, so I've never been a mean person. I've never tried to be a toxic person. Now I do hold opinions, and one thing I've learned very early on was control who I tell what opinions to. Um, and so there's a lot of opinions I have I just hold back, uh, because I don't, you don't get into fights that you don't want to be in. And
Yeah.
um, so yeah, just put some good out into the world, and the world will hopefully give you something good back.
I've also, I don't know if you've ever felt like this, Kevin, but I've also, and maybe it's because I've run the conference or multiple conferences, I always felt the obligation to kind of set the example you expect the community to have.
Yeah.
And, if you're an ass, then what does it say about like the work that you're doing and the thing you're trying to cultivate? To the point where I don't even know that I've been 100% authentically me because of kind of bearing this like cross of like I've had to quit gigs because of the toxic trait that existed in that development group. Because if I worked there, then it meant I was like accepting that that's what it should be, and I felt like that was too much.
Yeah.
Like I just couldn't be associated with it because that meant like that conference then is approving of this, and it's like I can't do that. So the moral piece kind of stepped in from a kind of a day to day thing to just set that example. Whether or not anybody ever saw it, cared, I have no idea.
But you knew about it.
Yeah.
Right, I could go to sleep. Right, I couldn't do it myself. I couldn't live with myself if I continued that way.
That's totally fair. Because you also don't want it to be like, oh, yeah, come work here because Clark of that conference
Yes.
worked here. It's a great place, blah, blah, blah. And then they get in and be like, what is this hell? How did you live here?
Right. And I'm sure Kevin too, like you get asked questions of like, you get asked for referrals in this and who should you work with in that. And that does come back to you. And if you misstep in that, like it does become a reflection upon yourself. So, when people ask me for a job referral and I don't, just because me, if I don't know you, I can't really give it to you because I have the other side of people asking me, hey, who can I hire that fits into this place? Because a lot of people, and I have to dance on that carefully too.
I'm the same way. I'll offer to put the job listing out there, but I'm not going to recommend someone to someone I don't know, and vice versa. I've done very few referrals. Just it's like you said, if you put a referral out there, you're approving that person, you're approving that company that you're connecting, and thankfully that's never backfired yet. But yeah, it's hard to make referrals because sometimes I only know people on a personal level, like I've never worked with them.
Right.
So there are probably dozens, if not hundreds, of people I have interacted with 15 years that on a personal level go, that Alec guy he's a good guy. He may be the worst employee ever. And how do I know that? I've never worked with him. But if I say, oh yeah, you should totally work with Alec, and he turns out to be awful, you just never know. Actually, let's not pick on Alec. We'll pick on Brian because Brian's not here. I don't know if that Brian guy would be a great guy to work with because I've never worked with him.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because, like, I think sometimes the people don't think about that, right? Because the referral bonus, the referral whatever, Some people are more money motivated to the point that like that doesn't really track in their mind. They're just like, oh yeah, here's an easy thing I could do, and if I get $500, $1,000, what whatever the referral bounty is right now. Some people just kind of do that. But yeah, I think you guys are right. Like there is a certain aspect of it that reflects upon you, right? Because you're like, oh yeah, this would be a great person to work here. It's like, do you care about this company or this individual enough that like you'd want to work with them? Or do you want that $500, $1,000, whatever it ends up being? I think those are very different things that sometimes it's easy to lose track of, or just be like, uh, trying to help somebody who maybe doesn't have a job as well, right? Like that sometimes I feel like trumps whatever they might have for referrals or whatnot.
I'll say one thing. I'm approaching the half a century mark. Too fast. One of the things that I didn't really pay enough respect for, and I think I told you this, Alec, in one of our sessions, is the frameworks and the relationships that you lay down when you're younger will pay dividends when you are older. And I mean that in ways like, when you're young in your career, you're working on a lot of projects, you're meeting a lot of people, there's a lot of moving, shaking, there's a lot of things. But at some point, these people become directors and VPs and startup founders and their networks grow too. So if you're going to bulldoze your path along the way, you never know when you're going to need that need. Yeah. And later down the line, they could be, running a company that you really want to work for, and they have a lot of connections, and they're going to go, oh. So.
I'll agree with that. The number of people, so this is a very Microsoft centric podcast. Like the number of people I know working for Microsoft now, that when I met them, they were not working for Microsoft, and I had built relations with them when they were just working for regular companies, and they all go off to Microsoft. Now I'm in this weird position where I'll say, oh, I know someone on this Azure team. But and folks will ask me, how do you know that person? Oh, I met them 10 years ago when they worked at this little consulting company. And we were both at a code camp together. And it's like, that's how all these relationships started. I love saying, I knew so-and-so before they were famous. And
right.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people get really hung up on like, I got to meet the famous person. And I'm like, no. You got to meet the person on the come up.
Yeah.
Because that's where you grow and you get those relationships. I mean, not that the famous person isn't, worth meeting. Just don't be so close-minded that there's not, a slew of others who matter equally, if not more.
I think it's definitely the steel sharpens steel thing too, right? Like, because if you look at people who've already made it, there's the whole saying like, don't meet your idols kind of thing. Because I met a lot of, I'd say in the last couple of years, some of the bigger names in Microsoft. Like, I had a one-on-one conversation with Hanselman. He came and talked at our user group. I ran into him at Build, just like randomly walking around. We chatted for like 5-10 minutes, and I was like, this is weird because he's just like a normal dude. Or we had dinner with Richard Campbell. Like, again, this is like a normal dude, and you're just like, oh my God. And at the end of the day, they're just people. But I think to your guys' point of, if your goal is to just be around their sphere, right? They've already made it. They can reach out and talk to other people that they idolize as well, and like hit conversations. Whereas if you're on the come up with somebody, I feel like you're both fighting that fight of, building your brand or building yourself up to that standpoint of, hey, here's real things we're fighting with. Because like, I feel like once you've made it, your problems and ideas and is the same as like the architect versus the developer, right? Like totally different day-to-days. You're thinking about totally different things. Your problems aren't the same. And if you get to the point where you need to ask for help, be like, I don't know, I don't deal with those problems anymore, versus like the person in the weeds or the trenches with you of like, yeah, here's what I did, and they just send you like a blog post or whatever. That's an interesting point though that you brought up, Kevin, of now fast forwarding through your career, like, you know, all these people. And Clark, you kind of got the advice early on, like, don't build a personal brand. Like, to me, that kind of goes hand in hand with like a network. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't really see a personal brand as like, I want people to know who I am, what I do. I want people to just be able to say, like, oh, yeah, Alex here. If I need help, approach me if they need help with anything. Um, Kind of curious how you guys went about doing that. Like, was that intentional on either of your parts? Or is it just kind of a matter of like, you know, we talked in the community, we became the community guys, and then started working with people, and then different people just started, you know, hey, they're nice guys to work with. Like, did you eventually get intentional about doing that kind of stuff, or did it just kind of sheer happen chance?
For me, it was kind of it evolved into that. So anyone who's ever heard my origin story, like out of college, I went to work for Symantec, worked there for 3 months. Thought I was, you know, hot stuff because I was working for this big company on really cool stuff. And 3 months in, they just laid off the entire building. So I had this like initial thought very early in my career, thank goodness, that there was no such thing as job security. So if you wanted job security, you had to build your own job security. And I went to work for a consulting company and decided, like, all right, that personal job security is not just being good at the job I do. It's meeting people and it's just trying to put as many tools into my toolbox as possible. And that had evolved into, you know, going to user groups and going to back then code camps and different events and meeting the people and building that, not so much the community, like building this little tribe of others who are coming up at the same time I am, and getting kind of peer pressured into doing a talk. And like, yeah, Kevin, you should really do a talk. You should talk on this. And like, okay. So peer pressured into doing my first talk, like got that bug and like, oh, I want to talk about all the things now, and rinse, repeat. And the first time someone comes up to you at a conference who you've never met before and go, you know, I saw you at this event, I saw you at that event, and it kind of gives you that little bit of dopamine. It's like, ooh, people can, someone knows who I am,
Mm-hmm.
and just rinse, repeat that. But where that really paid dividends was when I left my W-2 job and went to work for myself as a contractor, as a consultant. Like, that's when everything started paying off, because I was now a trusted commodity in the industry. So it was easier for people. We go back to what we were talking about earlier. Like, people were recommending me. They were throwing gigs at me, and it just kind of built from there. It's like, all right, the more people who know who I am and know what I do, ultimately is better for me. So not a personal brand per se, but good for me, and the work I've been doing.
Yeah, if I look back, I don't want to say I have regrets, but I feel like I did it very wrong. I'm a big believer in action, so your actions kind of speak louder than words, and just done a lot. I've interacted with a lot. I hope, you know, when I say some people feel that they can trust it, that, you know, I'll back up the stuff I say. I've had this weird life where there's like day job and then running TC, and the conference has, you know, disproportionately taken my attention than, you know, my own personal self. So things like the blog, the speaking that I used to do, the consult, like all of that sort of went away because there just weren't enough hours in the day. And essentially I was working, you know, 2 full-time jobs for the past, you know, 15 years. And, you know, I look back to the people that I grew up with. You look at a Hanselman or Campbell or any of those guys, at least in the Microsoft space, you know, they've kept their blogs and newsletters going. And I've created podcasts and they've died, and newsletters and they've died. And I think about the thousands and thousands of people that I've had on those places, and I haven't done a good job of just like stacking the work and putting them together so that the audience was here now. And I feel like I sit here now, 25 years later, sort of with a lot of failed experiments, um, that, and I'm starting over, because I just put all my effort and energy into growing TC and trying to get that there to, to the fact that I haven't even had a website because I just said, it's just, I don't have the time for it. And, I just did by doing, and I, still, we would use, or I would use when people would ask, nobody ever asks about engineer Clark. Everybody asks about event Clark and think I'm an event planner. They have no idea that wrote the platform that sits and runs this thing and consult during the day and whatever, worked at Microsoft, whatever. None of that is anything that anybody thinks about me. But yeah, I think you have to be intentional, especially today. Like in today's digital world that we live. To Kevin's point about job security, that's your job. That's not somebody else's job. And so you need to, tend to your garden and what that looks like. And as it ebbs and flows and the things that you work on, like that's how you choose to document and put it out there. That's your responsibility. And somebody else may or may not do it better. But better do something.
Does it bother you that you're not known as Engineer Clark and you're known as that conference event planner Clark, more or less? Or is it just...
No, it doesn't bother me that I'm not Engineer Clark. It bothers me that I haven't done a better job of just curating my own personal brand, because I feel like I'm selling and selling and selling and selling over and over and over again. So where it should be sort of easier now, like it's not as easy as I would like it to be.
That's fair. I know you're doing a lot more in the technical space. I'm just kind of curious of how do you guys go about crafting that message or crafting that brand, putting out there? Like, are you just putting like, hello world, I'd love to do consulting now, Clark, instead of like focusing less on posting about TC? Or like, Kevin, how have you found success of like having those people reach out to you and be like, hey, we need help now? Like, was it trial and error? Did you like start sending it to people, or was it just like, just working on your craft kind of took you there?
The success I've had in consulting, and so I'll concentrate there because that's ultimately what's important to me, is what makes me money or what ultimately makes my personal brand better, which should bring me money. And then there's another sliver that brings me personal joy, but we're not going to cover that right now. On the consulting side, I have tried very hard to position myself as I'm your .NET, your Azure guy. Like I'm building business systems in .NET and Azure. And my focus is on small, medium-sized businesses. And that's work I've been doing for 10 years. That's what I'm good at. And that has worked so much better for me than when I was early consultant, Kevin. I would go, I will do anything. You want me to write JavaScript? I'll write JavaScript. You want me to write some Python? I'll write some Python. Man, I don't care. Give me some QBasic. Just pay me. Like that did not work as well as when I was putting out content on here's cool things I like to do in .NET and ultimately how they solve different business problems. And those, like, if I look back at my biggest contracts, it's always come from I'm talking about a very specific thing I like working on, being very intentional about, I like SignalR. So here's cool things I've done with SignalR. I'm teaching people how to use SignalR. And I have contracts that have come in specifically because someone has read articles I've written on SignalR and go, we like this. Will you just do the work for us? Totally. So yeah, being intentional and being specific about who you are, what you like to talk about. Doesn't mean you can't talk about other things, but I would like to say if someone was having a conversation and they said, hey, I'm having trouble with SignalR. Do you know someone who knows SignalR really well? that Kevin comes up in that conversation because he's put out a ton of material on it. I mean, that's kind of my hope. Like from the personal brand standpoint, that someone says Kevin Griffin, you know what I talk about.
Sound familiar, Alec? Does it sound like anything I've said to you?
Yeah, so it's actually really funny that you bring that up because I've been talking to Clark about a lot of the AI stuff I've been focusing on, and he kind of the same thing. It's like, trying to create content, create episodes of this, just everything I do to be, snap your fingers in the Midwest. Who knows AI? Oh, I know Alec. He's all over the place. Let's call him up and see what's going on, or see if there's anything you can help with, or in kind of the same realm you're talking about, like whatever freebies I can put out there too. Like, let's raise all ships too, because to your point, Signal R, right? Like, you need companies doing cool enough stuff to do Signal R. Okay, here's freebies to get you in the door to start doing cool stuff, so we can then collaborate on more complex, cool stuff.
There's a guy in the like entrepreneur community. His name is Nathan Barry, and I love kind of his story. But one of the things he always says is teach everything you know, and I've always taken that to heart. It's like even if it's stuff that you would expect people to pay you for, like we all have certain knowledge that we would expect people to pay us for. Just give a lot of that stuff away. Just give the knowledge away, because 9 times out of 10, like giving the knowledge away is very broad, and people have very specific issues that they're trying to solve, and it takes a certain skill set to take broad knowledge and apply it to a specific use case. So yeah, like I've given away so much knowledge, but I still get leads coming in because people don't have the time, energy, or ability to take the free information out there and distill it into a solution.
Yeah, I just want to highlight what Kevin said, which is the intentionality piece. And I think you and I, Alec, were talking about this before, but of the 100%, like the bottom 90% just give it away, and the top 10% will pay you far more than the bottom 90 ever would.
Yeah.
And the two kind of build on top of one another, but being intentional about what you're doing, stacking the work such that it aligns to really what you want to do, doing the homework to figure out what it is that you want to do and why you want to do it, and what you're passionate about. If you can get those things in alignment, then the momentum then builds on itself, and you're not like fragmented in your messaging, in your thoughts, in your work. Like, you're never going to get any momentum on something when you're working on 10 different things that are just disjointed all over the place, and nobody knows who you are, what you do, or why you do it. Like, you're just just half-assed across the board. So don't be half-assed. Like, be as intentional as you can, plan as much as you can, and because it will only yield you a payoff down the road.
Which is super interesting considering, education / like when you first get in the job force, right? You're learning so much, especially my experience has been mostly consulting. So you get jumped in the deep end of the kiddie pool, and it's like, okay, we need a Angular app hosted in Azure with .NET. They said, we'll have a pipeline set up, but all the pipeline does is it says true is true on every push to main. Go have fun. And it's like, we don't know IAC. We don't know GitHub Actions. We don't know, YAML code. We're learning .NET. We're learning Angular. Like, granted, there's people on the teams that usually know each little piece of that. But as a team comes together, it's like, okay, now we need to all cumulatively know this to be able to move the ship forward. I feel like early on in my career, the advice was that old saying of the generalist versus the specialist, of like, person, I'm going to blank on the saying, but it's the master of many is better than the master of one. And then they're both better than the master of none kind of thing. It's like, okay, well, that's great for starting off, but I think there is also that point in your career where you have to pick a direction, pick a specialty, because to your guys' point, that if you're going to be the generalist, that's great, but you're going to be competing with all the other generalists. And then on top of the specialists, right? Like if you have that really complex issue, you're probably not going to call it, if I have a really complex signal R issue, using your example, Kevin, I'm not going to call up the first .NET dev I know, right? I'm going to call Kevin, maybe pay a little more, but know that it's going to be a fraction of the time for it to solve, and it's going to be solved the right way. I'm kind of curious, like at what point did you decide my breadth is good enough? Let's start getting some more depth and like really be that guy. And like, do you feel like you've lost out on anything, or did you just say goodbye to everything else around it, or like kind of how do you level that of being the specialist and being the generalist?
I think too many people go look at that answer to that question at such a micro level instead of zooming out at the macro and going, I'm going to work for 30 to 40 years, and realize that there's seasons of change of like today you could be security and tomorrow you could be AI, and it's okay to like meander through the river. And there's, I don't know, I've been around long enough. I don't know. I always feel like a rookie. So if you just get good at learning, then it's not that you're neither one or the other. It's just where do you choose to put the energy, and that water will kind of flow to that. So I could sit here and learn about Vue and React and all those other things, but I don't I've let that go because I don't need to. I know enough at a high level, sure, but I don't need to be an expert in all of them. There's other people who do that shit. And I also don't need to stand on a pedestal, like waving my hand and say, look, I know all of all.
Yeah.
The irony is that's a big thing in tech for somebody to be the expert in all things and try to talk like it. But the reality is fuck that. Like, this is what I do. Like, this is the sphere of the things that I care to know, and good. Over time, it builds up, right? You just get a bigger and bigger toolbox of the things you've done and go from there.
Also think in our industry, we throw around the label expert very, very broadly. Like,
Yeah.
oh, so-and-so's an expert in this thing that's only existed for 6 months. Like,
You mean
because
you're not an expert in DeepSeek already?
I'm not, no. And I don't want to be. Like, what they say, like an expert has to work like what
10,000 hours, yeah.
to be an expert in something. And you take something like, we've all done .NET, like we've been doing .NET for goodness how many years, and I think I'm at that point on the imposter scale syndrome where I'm like, do I really know .NET at all? Like they've been changing so much. Am I an expert anymore, or was I like an expert in .NET 10 years ago, and like now I'm not, because they've changed so much stuff and they've added things. I think, and to one of the earlier points, like Clark was saying, like you don't have to be specialized in the same thing all the time. We talk about .NET, but go back 25, 30 years, like everyone who is well known in .NET now used to be well known in like Delphi, or used to be well known in FoxPro. Like that was their specialty, and then this .NET thing came along and they pivoted and moved on to new expertise. I know a lot of people who have done that over their career, and I think it's healthy because you take the experiences that you had, you take it onto this new thing, and you bring some of that trust along with you, and you're not trying to hawk the old thing that no one cares about anymore.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because it's like let's say my come up was in the biggest, like the big cloud revolution, right? Like it was, we're going to the cloud or you're going to die. On-prem servers or for dinosaurs, like, and I feel like the market itself is, especially with AI, like starting to reevaluate that, or I feel like everybody reevaluates it every few years to say like, did this actually work? And it's interesting because like a lot of people move to Azure's great, Azure's gonna rule everything, which don't get me wrong, it is good, but there's also the fact that like certain systems only need to be up for one or two people. Those one or two people always go to an office every day. do you really need the extra security implications of this thing is publicly hosted? Do, like, and also the selfish part of a lot of people like to do resume driven development. How do I put Kubernetes on my resume if I don't use Kubernetes? Even if it's serving one person and the business will operate if this site does go down, I need that on my resume. So I'm going to go and purposely use Kubernetes so I can say, hey, I'm a Kubernetes developer now. When in the real world, that doesn't always equate because the problems of one person using a cluster is not the same as hundreds or thousands. Like, okay, like this is not the same thing at all. Building a system at scale is totally different than building a system for one person.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm kind of curious. So have you guys, like the tangential things you talked about .NET kind of going away or feeling not in that trough of learning? Do you feel like you've gotten to the point where you're just lost when it comes to like front end development then? Is that like just a thread you've given up altogether, or are you still like actively learning and doing that just because of day to day, or have you just like I'm the .NET guy now? Or
I mean, foundations never change, right? They get enhanced, but like CSS has been CSS since CSS, and yeah, there's a lot of new things, but I don't know that foundation. If you learn the why and you really understand how things work, then I think no matter whatever the change that comes later, it's easier to get up to speed and continue to move on. So there was a long time where I didn't do any front end stuff, and then the need called, and then I started doing it again. And am I an expert? Well, I wouldn't say I was an expert in anything, to be quite honest, but then your attention goes there. And, I've done more true front end, like banging on code in the last 5 years than I did in the other 20. But that doesn't mean I forgot how to do API development, because that's what I cut my teeth on, was how do you really do that stuff. And so I don't know that it's as transactional as people think it is.
I do quite a bit of front end. I would never say I specialize in it. I'm functionally capable with front end, and I have opinions on front end. I also think a lot of like the JavaScript front end community industry has collective ADHD, and they like to change their mind every 5 minutes. I think that's hard to specialize. Like, I don't think it's as bad nowadays as it probably was, 5-6 years ago.
mm-hmm.
But yeah, I say current in it, and kind of building on what Clark was saying. Like, I understand the systems underlying all these things, and I think that's the important part. Is just having a basic understanding of how all these systems work together. So if you move to something new, you kind of already know what you're going into, or at least you have the capability to figure it out pretty quickly. I don't do React every day, but if I have to jump into a React app, you
feel
it takes
dirty.
me a second. I understand. It comes back. I have an allergic reaction, and I just move on. So, although I will say, like, given talking about front end stuff, we were joking at a conference a couple of weeks ago about jQuery, and I said I have not worked professionally with jQuery in a long time, but I could sit down right now and write perfect jQuery, like without referencing any documentation. So I really, if jQuery could make a comeback, I would.
They released a version of it, don't you?
I know,
recently?
I saw that, and I celebrated. Like, I was very excited knowing I would never use it.
Well, that's a good example, because like jQuery was like the biggest thing at the time. We all used it. We had a reason we used it, which was it got a lot of things out of the way. And I worry a little bit that when these things come around, people forget, like, you should learn how the browser works and why, right? Like, what does the event structure mean, and how is it bubbled up, and what are those principles? jQuery made a lot of that stuff. So I can't even believe we're fucking talking about jQuery. It made those things easy, but then new frameworks came along, Svelte, Vue, React, and they, you know, you start using those principles, and if you don't really understand how it works or why you're doing it, you're sort of like lost. But yeah.
I remember Angular 1
Oh
came
yeah.
out, and
yeah.
it was like the first time everyone kind of looked like, ooh, maybe I don't need jQuery.
Oh yeah.
And I
Totally.
remember teaching it, and the way I initially taught Angular was I started with jQuery problems. I'm like, all right, we need to do this, and
Yep.
if we're using jQuery, we have to do X, then Y, then Z, and then and we'll go through all the steps of how to solve a simple problem
Yep.
with jQuery, and go, all right, Angular, it's one line of code, like boom, it's
Yep.
done. Like I
Yep.
don't have to do all this extra stuff,
Yep.
and it was teaching the systems, like all
Yeah.
right, or the problem and the
Yeah.
solution. It's like, all right, this is a slightly easier solution to a problem that we had.
Yep.
And you fast forward to where we are now, it's like to something like React. Well, what you have to do is you have to put the blah inside the blah inside the blah, 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 blah all the way down the stack. You go, who came up with this?
Well,
Like,
fuck
this
React,
doesn't solve
but
any problems. It
Yeah.
doesn't solve any problems. It creates 15 more problems.
yeah. It's funny you use that example. I'm going to build on that example because the same thing was true when .NET came out. If you remember how hard it was to wire an event handler to JavaScript code, like pre.NET, you were like, I mean, you literally had to excavate dead bodies and like shove them in the browser and then dance. And you were, I mean, it was horrible. And then .NET came around and you had this like automatic like button click association, and it was this magical thing in the background of like, oh my God. And then we all forgot about it, right? jQuery comes around. And I liken today, and I've said this like so much over the past month, everybody's freaking out about AI. And I'm like, look, this is like the .com days. Like I'm excited about it because it feels like, hey, we have something to learn that's fun, that's going to disrupt things and change how we do it. No different than when .NET came out and we didn't have to worry about event handlers, and everybody's like, well, what am I going to do now that I just have to click a button? It's like you could actually build a business problem that makes the money that pays you the exorbitant salary that you want anyways, right? And I think about how we're just sort of there right now of like new stuff's coming that sweeps this old cruft under the rug that we don't really need to be doing. And, what does that look like? And a whole bunch of new problems will come and emerge, architectures and this and that. Like it's not, the only people who are going to lose jobs are the complacent ones who sit around and go, oh my God, I can't do the same repetitive bullshit that I've been getting paid 200 grand a year for. Like, right. That's why these things come out and then we do new things with it. Like, that's exactly why we're employed, is to replace shit like this. We've been replacing people's jobs for a long time. Like, yep.
Do you guys think that engineers in general are worse now than they were back then? Give you guys a chance to make the boomer argument of just because like frameworks or mostly frameworks abstract so much away that like I was using singletons before I realized it was a singleton in .NET through dependency injection, right? Like,
I don't think it's a matter of being worse. I think today the problem is there's a lot of different ways to do something, whereas back in the day, it was a little easier to kind of do things because there were books, but there wasn't like an internet full of shit to make you do things 92 different ways. I think the past 5-ish years, people have gotten complacent and comfortable, and I see people who aren't hungry, and I say hungry as a like, let's go learn, let's go hack on something, let's go to a conference, let's go figure out. And in fairness to some of those people, there hasn't been a lot of anything new and exciting to even really do that. I'm not saying there's that new and exciting shit, but it's like, another React release, another this, another that. And sure, Tailwind and Svelte and these things make that easier, and you don't necessarily need to learn the how some of this stuff works. It's it can be construed as good or bad in different contexts of things. But I'll go back to what Kevin said earlier. It's like, we're really here to solve business problems, right? Like, how are we solving business problems that make money, that pay us, that make people's lives better? And if you start deriving away from that, then like what you have is this theoretical chest pumping of like, look, I can make a computer do a certain thing. I don't know, cool, I guess. Like, I'd rather get the payday.
There's a lot of black boxes out there. There's far. So go back to what Clark was talking about, like ASP.NET Web Forms. To an extent, was a black box, but it was a black box that was approachable. Like if you learn how the black box works, you could do some really powerful things with ASP.NET Web Forms.
Yeah.
Fast forward today, you have a lot of
ASP.NET Web Forms.
Web Forms. But like ASP.NET Core is pretty engineer friendly. Like the way I put it this way is, if I'm working on a solution and I go, I really need to be able to do X. Like as the engineer, I know how I want to solve the problem, and the good frameworks will give you an avenue to solve the problem the way you want to solve it. Or a lot of times they'll say, well, we know what you're thinking, try it this way. It's a slightly different approach, but it solves the problem the same way. But then you have a lot of immature frameworks. And I'm looking at JavaScript on this because this has happened to me more than once, where I'll go in and I'll say, I want to solve the problem. I want to do X. And someone active in that community will go, you're solving that problem wrong. I'm like, I don't think I am. Like, I want to do X. They're like, no, you just you're doing it all wrong. I'm like, I don't think I am. I think your framework sucks. And like, well, how do you do this in your framework? And they go, we don't do that. I'm like, okay, how do you do this in your framework? And they're like, we don't do that either. I'm like, how do you get anything done in your framework? And they go, read the tutorial. I'm like, we do what the tutorial does, and that's about it. And once you, and then it's happened on more than one occasion where I think I know exactly how to solve a problem, and turns out they don't support any way to solve my problem, because no one had ever conceived that as a problem, and that needed a solution. And yeah, so I think, are engineers getting dumber? I think engineers are relying more on black boxes, and like, look at AI. AI is the black as the boxes, like, because you could ask AI the exact same thing 10 different, the same way 10 times and get different solutions every single time. It's like, it's all a black box. I can't explain how LLM works or neural net. I'm like, that's systems I don't understand. So, but there's a lot of people out there just relying on the systems, is just blindly relying on them and not understanding what's happening underneath. So I think there probably is a new generation of engineers who are not able to understand the systems the same way as some of us who have been around for a long amount of time.
This is my argument against that with TypeScript. Is you had a whole effort to convert type-friendly developers into a non-typed language, and it has led into a religious battle of things. And it's like, you should really just learn how JavaScript works.
Yeah.
Like, there are some great things about JavaScript. You're trying to make it C#, just use fucking C#.
There's a weird thing I've seen. So like in high school, I did like tech support for my high school because we had like a Fortune 500 company server for a high school's graduating class of like 50 kids a pop. Somebody convinced the superintendent that if you just kept buying server hardware, you never had to buy end user machines. So we had like a very beefy server. We even what was it? What Microsoft's like virtual machine environment, we beta tested it because we were in a rural little Iowa town. Nobody knew. Like they wrote about us way after the fact. So if it sucked, it didn't matter. But I feel like that helped with debugging skills, which to your guys' point, like knowing how processes and things work is a certain way of thinking, and it blows my mind sometimes about like the working with someone, and I'm going to pick on like a junior developer, a mid developer, somebody who's been at that role for like a very long time, how if it doesn't work exactly like the tutorial, or if you copy and paste the tutorial and it doesn't work, they just throw their hands up and be like, I can't do this, it's above my. And we're like, in my mind, like an engineer is somebody who gets most of the facts and then has to figure out how it works or try to build it. And just being like, hey, I copy and pasted the tutorial and it didn't work. It's like, to your point, Clark, do you need a 200K salary to be able to copy and paste from Stack Overflow? Like, a certain point, you do have to implement it and like understand it well enough to take, that broad example, as you said, Kevin, and make it work in your exact business case. And the amount of people I've seen just kind of like throw their hands up as soon as they get the first roadblock and be like, well, copy and paste didn't work, Google didn't work, I'm out of ideas. I don't think people are dumber. I think what's the word I want to use? There's been such a wide range of talent. I think code camps are a great one, right? Like, there's some really great paid code camps out there, and there's some that are just totally cash grab. I even worked with a developer a few jobs ago who's now like the lead mobile app engineer at a pretty big gas station chain. He went through a code camp. One of the best mobile developers I've ever known. And it's like, okay, so you have like guys who are like at this caliber, but then you have the people that, let's be honest, depending on the code camp, just paid the money to get a certification to say, I can be a developer now. And
I think you're
similar with
conflating.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think you mean
Boot
boot
camp.
camp, not
Yeah.
code
Yes,
camp.
sorry,
Code camps
sorry.
are amazing. Boot camps are not.
Yeah, boot
Yeah.
camp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The same thing happens in college too, though, right? Like you have the people that skate by with degrees and they paid the money, but they never really learned the stuff. And you get a piece of paper that said, hey, you could stick with it for 4 years, but there's developers I know who their engineering classes are the ones they did the worst on. Like their gen eds and other miscellaneous stuff that doesn't equate to the job, like math does sometimes, but for the most part it doesn't. Like they struggled in their Java class, but they aced their calculus. It's like, why don't you go be a mathematician?
I mean, what you're saying, it exists in all fields. And the reality
Yeah.
of what you're saying is there are some who will put in the work and some who won't. And your yield on that will be different. And so I think the interesting part about developers that people don't necessarily think about a lot is you compete on a global stage. And that is happening more and more, even though it's been happening ever since I've been around. That's happening more and more. And you're also going to compete against AI. And that could be, bad or good, depending upon however you choose to take it. But to think that you couldn't have a development team that has junior, senior, offshore, onshore, AI, non-AI all together, again, comes back to what business problem are you solving and what resources do you need at what cost? It's just the reality of it.
Yeah, and I think that's a conversation that some engineers don't think about all the time, right? Of like, we're here to solve the business problem, not to build the coolest shiny widget. If it's ugly but makes the business millions of dollars, they'll probably be okay if it's ugly.
There's a lot of Battleship Gray out there that
Yeah.
makes millions, if not billions, of dollars a year. Like,
Yep.
And they don't need to invest to make it look super pretty or whatever, because
no.
it's keeping the company afloat.
I wish I could remember the name, but there was a story about a school in Carolina bought some software from Oracle. It was like a customer management system, something like that, and they paid Oracle millions and millions of dollars for this system, and Oracle has to host it. They have to continue paying the yearly support on it, or else it all magically goes away. And then someone took a screenshot of it, and it looks like it was right out of 1995, and like on Netscape Navigator type interface. And this thing is making however many hundreds of millions of dollars a year in support contracts. It does not have to be pretty. It just has to be functional.
Yeah.
Number of places I've worked at would be fine with a green screen connected to a mainframe, and because it was functional and they knew how to use it. You don't need rounded corners. You don't need gradients. You don't need all that fancy stuff. You just need to be able to do your job and do your job quickly. You do that for someone, like, you are worth every penny that they'll pay you.
Right. You don't need the deal with Flexbox and all that other stuff. You just need to solve the business problem and
as
make the
quickly
money
as possible.
We did get a message in the chat. Have you heard of dark matter developers? Term looks like came from Scott Hanselman. There is a parallel between dark matter, which is like, invisible yet abundant, and a large, often unseen population of software developers. And they're not active on social media, rarely attend conferences,
Yeah.
often do older, more stable. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. It's the reason our communities, like Clark and I running events and user groups and stuff like that, there's no reason, no matter what market you're in, that you shouldn't have hundreds of people at your events if you were getting all the development talent in the region. The problem is that 99% of the developer talent in a region are the 9-to-5 developers who don't give a crap. It's like 5 o'clock, like, I'm done for the day. And they go off and do something else.
Yeah, I'm gonna riff on that just a little bit, and I think this is where the pandemic has really screwed things. Now you have a lot of people who work at home, so I think dark matter got like dark, like it's now dark matter. They're not at work. Yeah, like they're not at work. They're not showing up. They're not online. I don't know that there's anything wrong with the, quote unquote 9 to 5, but you can't get to them. And they would go to a conference. Some of them would go. We had a lot of people who would come to TC who were not on social media or any of that. But now with educational budgets cut and people losing jobs and the fact that they work at home and they're not in, or you're not in, depends, it can go either way because there's 1,000 Discords and 1,000 Slacks and 2,000 whatever other things. And there's 15 different social networks, and then there's crappy LinkedIn. You can't get to them. And I don't want to say it's a problem, but it is something that I'm hyper aware of because it's had a big effect on what we've done.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that means. Are you going to find them on Stack Overflow? Probably not, because I don't know what the fate of Stack Overflow is. Nobody really uses it anymore. So where are these people? What are they doing? Where are they getting educated? Where are they? What does their life look like now? I don't know.
It is interesting to try to meet people and stay connected, especially while you're being remote. Also put our Discord link there. Million Discords. Join another one. It's hard because to your point, I think there's two different ways to run a user group today. Matt Rui, who runs the .NET user group here in Omaha, has done a great job. Has always had, even post-pandemic, a 20-person attendance event, 20 to 30 is a bad attendance event for them. They're still hitting pretty good numbers, not quite pre-COVID. Mm-hmm. But then you have user groups that I've helped with the Azure user group, that kind of stuff, where we've decided to go. And his whole philosophy is user groups need to be in person. They need to be about building your network and connection and community. I've tried to go the other route of let's build a bigger network. Let's make people connect across different areas because then we get more diverse opinions. But to your point, Clark, if you're wholly online, you're then competing with people going off to home, shutting their laptop and going away.
Mhm.
And I think that's something we saw. We used to do them at like 5 o'clock ish. Nobody's getting on a Teams meeting after an entire day of work to go listen to somebody talk about a topic they may or may not care about. Like, so we've moved to the noon hour and have seen much better attendance because people can grab their food and maybe learn about a new topic between meetings, and it gives them a reason to tell their boss or whoever, like, "Hey, I need my hour lunch because I'm gonna go learn." It's free. You don't have to travel to it. You don't even have to put on pants necessarily, right? Like, just don't have your camera on, kind of thing. And because pulling
Well,
people
the
out of their house is hard.
well, the real question is, what's the engagement? How many people are actually paying attention?
Right.
What's the net value gained out of it? Or are they just hoarding, which developers love to do? They like to hoard the information or come get the index pointer to it and never really go back and use it. And that's where the whole in-person conference thing was really good, is because you had to do that. You had to come. You had to be present. And so online's great and it serves a place, but I would really, like, in your case, I would just say, I don't know, what's the point of, like, you could just put up a YouTube video and they can go watch it. Like, there's a very, we're just in interesting times, and we have to think about the effort that we're spending on things and what are people really doing. And, people got to get, people also have to be honest, which they're not.
Well, and there's a selfish piece of it too, right? Like when it comes to being the person who runs the user group from an organizer, like there's a lot of work that goes into coordinating space, coordinating food. And speaking from personal experience, nothing sucks more than you did all this work and then one person shows up.
Yep.
And you're like,
Yep.
cool, I have a mountain of food and nobody's here.
It's a horrible feeling.
Yeah,
But
it's got punch.
It's happened to all of us. There's nothing worse than being a speaker of one, and you're like, okay, we're totally gonna switch around what we're doing. We're just gonna sit next to one another and start pairing. Like, you just you're getting some free one-on-one training.
Gotten on a plane, checked into the hotel, went to the user group. 2 people showed up.
Yep.
Like,
Ooh.
like it's
Been there.
disrespectful at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it happens. I mean, there's just times where shit happens, but
Well, and there's
yeah.
we did something at our company too, I noticed. We used to do, it was called like Coffee Time or something. It was a Slack plugin that would pair people. And one thing we noticed was some people were really big on wanting it to be a bigger group. So it used to do just one-on-one pairing, and it would force you to like go have coffee and chat with somebody else at the company.
Yeah.
They pushed really hard to make it a group thing. I was really against it because my hypothesis, which I think ended up being true, was the more people, the less somebody felt bad about saying, I can't make it, or I'm not going to prioritize coming to this. Because if it's a one-on-one thing, your social contract is, hey, Kevin, if I flake out on you, you don't get to talk to somebody this week, and I feel bad, so I'm going to make sure I'm there. Versus when it's 2 or 3 people or 4, oh man, sorry, I got a client meeting popped up. I think, miss this week. And then you just have the point where, hey, the entire group flaked out but one person. Nobody's taken that like responsibility. And I think some of the online systems feel that way. You know, when you book a meetup, you're like, oh, I'll put it on my calendar, and if I can make it, cool. If not, who cares, right? Like, they're not going to miss me. And then what happens is you get 60 RSVPs and 10 people show up. Or I think I've had 50 people who sign up for food, so you buy food for 50 and then 20 show up, which is still a great showing, but you buy food assuming that 50 are going to show. Like, you're sending everybody home with tons of food.
Go back for seconds and thirds. Yeah.
Right. Please eat 3 people.
I mean, I would stress on the fact, and I think this is where, the industry gets a little complacent at times, is you need to go back to what value do you provide and what is it? Because if people aren't showing, They don't find value in it. They're voting with their feet. And they have other things that are more important. And so you have to reevaluate, and we're obviously doing it with that conference. You have to reevaluate what can you do for those who want to come and for what they need. And that changes.
Yeah.
And you're competing against family and time and YouTube and TikTok and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that there hasn't been a lot of change. So do people need to learn more React? No, they've already learned it. They don't give a shit. I get it.
I guarantee, like, a lot of these dark matter developers, if they lost their job last month, they'll be the first ones at your user group going, "I'm looking for work," and everyone goes, "Who are you?"
Yep.
And it goes back to what the very beginning of our conversation, right? Like, if no one knows who you are, no one's going to go out of their way to help you or refer you or refer anyone to you. Yeah, and if you're not looking for work, you're comfortable with where you are. Yeah, it's very easy to not show up. Like, the number of times I've gotten the excuse from someone that goes, I would come to the monthly meetings, but I got kids. I'm like, dude, I got 3 kids. Like,
Right. Yeah.
like,
you and me both.
I guarantee I probably have as much, if not more, responsibility than you do, and I still show up because it's a priority for me, and it's also 2 flipping hours a month. So, like,
right. The two things can be mutually true.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think you also, as an organizer, have to look in the mirror too and say, like, be a little selfish of at what point is it no longer worth it for you too, and be okay to let go. Because, like, we had that conversation before of, like, what does success look like for the group when we started? And we've been going for, I think, 3 years for the Iowa user group now.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're grabbing more groups, grabbing more people. To be frank, like, we're a nonprofit, so we have nonprofit status with Microsoft. The group costs us, I think it's $12.90 a year for our domain. That's it, because everything else is free. Our team's license is free. We have free Azure credits. Like, cost-wise, it's not bad. So we have to say, our worst attended meetings are, sometimes 10, 15 people. You turn around and sometimes get the occasional 200-300 views on YouTube or something crazy out of the blue. But it's like, okay, is that worth it for us? Well,
Yeah.
We now have a board of 4 people. It's not hard for each of us to take, 1/4 of the year to schedule a meeting that we then sit on and MC. Like, okay, it's really not that big of a deal. But if that in-person one, right? Like, I feel like your threshold of is this worth it is much lower much higher, because if you do all this work, have to go in person, leave your house, to your guys' point, put your kid responsibility on hold for an hour just for one person to show up, you're going to very quickly be like, this isn't worth it. Like, I'd rather just sit at home with my family, tell that one person, hey, message me on LinkedIn if you have issues, but I'm going to close up shop and move on, because it's so much work to just be like, nobody cared.
This is the year I'm shutting down my user groups that I've been running for 15 years, just because I have decided that I started the user group to be selfish. I continued to run the user group because I was selfish. Like, I wanted to bring smart people to me. I wanted to provide a place to build my network. Now it's just tiring, and it's work, and it's not bringing me the personal joy that it used to.
Mm-hmm.
So it's to the point where it's like, all right, if no one else, like, if I press that button on Meetup that says I'm no longer the organizer, y'all know what it does. It sends the email out to the entire group that says this group is shutting down. You could be the next organizer. And I want to press that button just because I want to see who picks it up.
Nobody.
And no one does. Yeah. And it's like,
Nobody's
all right,
gonna
well,
pick it up.
this has been important to me, but if it's important to no one else, then you know, I got way better things I could do with my time, and like I get more out of the yearly events we run in the
Yeah.
area than I do this monthly group, and it's just exhausting.
There,
It's sad.
there's, it
I mean,
is.
it's an unfortunate thing that it's just a reality of all user groups, you know, especially if they don't have the financial backing. I told you this too, Alec. It's like
Yeah.
find your sponsorship dollars. Like it has to be it has to be a benefit to all, which includes the organizer. Otherwise, there's just when times are tough, it's the first thing that goes.
Hmm.
And you really, it takes effort, and it takes a lot of time to coordinate these things and show up and do it, because it's not just, you know, an hour for Kevin. It's an hour of this, and it's an email, and it's a whatever, and a blah 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 blah. And when the same 6 people or 20 people show up time and time again, and then you turn around and say, I need somebody else to step in, and everybody's like scatters like little fleas. You're like, well, what the fuck am I doing this for? Like, where's the group in this?
Yeah.
And maybe I'm the weirdo because I feel like there's a generational divide almost of I've been trying to find other people who aren't of your guys's, like, I think we're technically in the same generation, but like I feel like your group of guys really pioneered user groups, and if you look at a user group organizer, they're around the same, like they grew up with you guys.
Yeah.
I've struggled to find younger developers who are super excited to join user groups because like we always have every meeting we're like, hey, if you want to join, let us know. Like we're always cool with more organizers. Like cut your teeth. It's a great way to get started. And just like crickets, a lot of the user groups we've been taking over are because we see those. You know, it's vacant. You got to pay for a meetup account if you want it.
Yeah.
And nobody does because it's like, yeah, I don't. I liked it. It was all right, but I don't really want to do it. It's kind of the same phenomenon when, if you've ever done CPR training in school, they tell you you need to purposely point out a single individual and say you call 911 because you just get the bystander effect of, yeah, somebody will do it, and then you fast forward I forget what meetup's thing is like 30 days, and oh man, that's a bummer. Nobody did it, and it's gone. You're like,
And
oh
everyone's like, when's the next .NET meetup or next Azure meetup? And you're like,
yeah,
never.
Yeah, somebody,
Yeah.
I was, you know, as part of TC, I was always trying to email the user groups. And one of the guys was telling me about, you know, how the Chicago user group was going. I was like, that hasn't ran in years.
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about? I'm like, that's how out of touch you are. Like, literally has not run in years. You're like, oh, shit. Yeah, well,
we're back now, baby. That's one of them we picked up to help start getting content. But yeah, it's you hit the nail on the head. I feel like when people are adopting the cloud, there was a much more the surface area of an Azure user group was a lot bigger because everybody was learning. I feel like people have gotten to the point where either, oh, that's the platform team's problem, or there's like even sub roles at companies. Like deploying an end-to-end app is great, but like it really requires the auth people, then it requires the platform people, and it requires the DevOps people, and it requires like normal developers don't always, because in their current roles it doesn't matter, like don't see, hey, I need to own this end-to-end process because I don't want to be a platform person, or you know, and I've debated on, do we go broader? I know one of the guys who runs the Omaha Azure user group here has spun up a cloud native user group. So he's like, you know, Azure's great, but he moved to a role that he does Azure, but his company's primary, I think, is GCP. So he's like, I'm just going to do cloud native now because I feel like that hits developers and I still get my cloud itch. But I think it just shows like the market, to your guys' point, shifting a little bit. And do we just keep rolling with it? Do we just only talk about AI because that seems to be what's hot and sexy right now? I don't know.
I always wondered if we should stop calling them user groups.
Okay,
Because
just rebrand.
what's a user group? Like user group had a meeting 20 years ago. Like, and we just kind of kept the label and just kept moving the label forward. Like everyone kind of collectively knew what the label user group meant. But
Yep.
I'm wondering if you get someone out of a boot camp, go, hey, you want to go to the user group? They're like, what's a user group? Like,
Yeah.
and I don't even know if I necessarily want to call it meetup. Like that
Yeah.
sounds,
Yeah.
it sounds like you're hooking up with people.
Yep.
So
Well, and
I
it's-
don't know.
The
I
online
don't think
ones.
I don't think it has any brand I don't either one of them. I don't think the brand recognition is there. They're not being advertised. It's to your point. Nobody really knows what the fuck it is. So, you know,
I really like so Central Maryland has it's Central Maryland Association of .NET Professionals. That's what they call themselves. Like no user group, none of that. Is it?
Yeah.
This is the Association of .NET Professionals. And it's like, oh, that sounds super fancy. I want to be in the Association of .NET Professionals.
So it's interesting you say that because that's a very non-tech industry thing. Like if you're in death care or you're in plumbing or whatever, they all have associations. And in tech, we don't have any of that.
Maybe we
You
should.
just have IEEE. Is that the only real
No.
professional one?
Not for us. Like if you're an engineer.
There's a
Like an
small.
What's the ACM, Association of Computing and Machinery, or something? Like that
Oh,
was the
yeah.
only thing available when I was in college.
Yeah.
You could be
Yeah,
an
yeah.
ACM.
Do we? Yeah, I'm kind of curious because, like, especially with our user group, it feels almost like we are the Azure show that you tune into, and you can ask live questions of the show.
Yeah.
But it's to your guys' point, like it's kind of moving away from what I would say is a typical meetup because we have a lot of people just like consuming the content and less so.
I mean, what makes you different than a Twitch live stream?
Right. There's not. Other than
Then stop acting like it.
right. And I think
No,
at that
I
point,
just mean like that's the like if you want more people to grow or if you want more people and to grow and whatnot, you have to look at what it is today and what it is not is user groups. And saying that your user group that you're gonna log into a Zoom meeting, you'd be better off just having a freaking Twitch stream and streaming once a month and embracing what streaming looks like, and people can ask questions and do that and dump the old baggage that exists.
that's fair. I think through this call, I've never really thought of it in that lens until now.
And I'll
That's-
add to that. And if you're doing that, this is strictly the reason why we don't do virtual events is because you're not cultivating a community when you're doing that.
Correct.
You're cultivating a viewership.
Your
Um,
entertainment.
Yep. It's like people who love The Office. It's like they watch The Office independently, but they're not going out. Well, in a lot of cases, and talking to other people who watch The Office. They're not seeking other people who watch The Office. It's
Well, and this was the point I was going to make earlier, but I didn't, of like the virtual part, like your whole personal tolerance of how successful it is, right? Like the wider reach you have selfishly, like feels good for me, right? Because I can talk to people in Denver. People in Denver know who I am. People in Chicago know who I am. Like I'm growing my personal brand while also providing something for free, to your point. But like, so that's another reason why you take on more. But to your point, then you're just building a viewership. You're not really building a. Our goal is to build a community, but converting somebody from a viewer to a community member is a lot harder. I feel like if somebody shows up in person, they've already made that commitment. Like this is a community, I'm a part of it.
So I think to build on that, and then I have to drop because I have a meeting. You said community, and I think you have to define what does a community mean, and what behaviors do you want to see exhibited when it's a community. And for me, and this is where I think I don't want to say gone wrong with TC, but the expectations were a little different. I thought of us as a community, and the behaviors that we were looking for was how are people interacting with one another? How are people supporting one another? How do people know one another? how do they treat one another when they're in person? Are they engaged? Are they asking questions? Will they do an open space? Like, that was my grade against how are we as a functioning community. It was not, are people getting educated? Because I look to Udemy and this and that as like online education. We would use those sessions as like little sparks, such that you could find people who had the same vested interest in that topic area, and then could go off and talk more about that thing. So we always had, I think, community and conference were kind of at conflict with one another, because they meant different things to different people. And so if you're saying like, I want to grow a community, well, then you have to be really honest with you as to what that really means, and can you do it? And we throw that term around so loose that, people may know one another in a live chat, but you ain't going to find me in the grocery store. Like, you're not going to be able to pick me out. Do I have a place that I can go to tap you on the shoulder and like seek help? If the answer is no, then the reality is you're not a community. You're just a bunch of chaps online watching the same thing. And I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm just saying you need to be authentic to what you're doing. And if you are, I think that will yield a higher return, just like when we were talking about your personal brand and the things you're doing. Again, you're leaning into what it is that is getting you there. You're putting the effort kind of all in the same, momentum in the same direction. So, and people today are different. They learn different when they're at home. Like, I get it. And they do things async, and I get it. Like, it's fine. I cannot like some of it because I'm old, but also history repeats itself. So we'll see things come back. Somebody have a great idea to have a hackathon, and you're like, we did those all the time. Like, they're not new.
There's this great new concept called a hackathon from the before
Yeah,
times.
it's like when we're gonna like look at technology and like hack on it. Yeah, it's great.
We'll call it a code together.
Right.
We'll
Right.
find some new name for it.
Yeah. Just a rebrand. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you guys chatting with us. Hopefully we made Brian adequately jealous for having to miss. But any last plugs either of you want to push? I know you have to drop first, Clark. You want to?
Yeah, I mean, you go check out my really crappy website at fromcodetoclarity.com. There you go.
Awesome. Anything you want to plug, Kevin?
Nope. Yeah, I got nothing going on that I care too deeply about. So, yeah, I'm on the socials and love to chat with people if anyone has comments. And if anyone has a negative opinion of me, let's chat, because I think you're wrong. So.
There we go. All right.
If you have a
Until
negative
next
opinion of me, I don't want to know.
You don't.
I got enough problems.
week. Awesome.
All
Cool.
right,
Thanks,
gents.
guys.
Cheers.
Until next week.
All right, man. Yeah,
Yeah. Thanks for chatting. I do.
no problem, man.
We just bumped it.